Every year we go hiking somewhere we've not been before.
That's the voice of Ralph Cossa. He's going hiking in Iceland. I wish I were going with him. And P.S., this is ThinkTech Hawaii, Asia in Review. And we're going to talk with Ralph Cossa of Pacific Forum. He's the president of Pacific Forum. We're going to talk about foreign policy implications of drone development here in Hawaii. And that's kind of, to promote and talk about and develop the show we're going to do on July 25th, Thursday, 2 weeks from now, on the very same subject of drones in Hawaii, drones over Hawaii, the title of the show. So I just want to mention the speakers in that show. Ralph was going to be our speaker, but he's going to be in Iceland. That's the problem. Oh. We'll talk more about Iceland. But Avi Soifer of the School of Law, you can talk about the law about drones. I guess that's mostly international law, and the ethics about drones, and that's really an interesting question, given what's happened even in the last few years with drones. We're going to talk with Carl Baker of Pacific Forum, who knows a lot about drones, and he'll be your stand-in, Ralph.
Retired Air Force officer, so.
He knows. We'll talk with Sung Choi. Sung Choi is the #2 at the College of Engineering, assistant dean, I think. And his specialty over the past 10, 15 years has been underwater autonomous vehicles. So he's real familiar with autonomous vehicles and that kind of technology. And Gene Ward, who believes in, who sits on a committee, I think the technology committee in the Senate, state Senate, and who is, into space travel from Hawaii and trying to make Hawaii a very high-tech place. Always been the case as long as he's been in office. Been a long time. He's perfect for this panel. Anyway, it'll be very interesting. And Peter
Sorry,
Crouch.
I'm going to miss it.
Yeah, well, maybe you can, we're broadcasting on radio, internet. You can catch that
I'll
over there.
bring a little crank up the set or something.
Oh, it's going to be a good trip.
From the glacier, hello.
Yeah. And Peter Crouch. Peter Crouch is going to moderate the program, so it'll be terrific. And we will miss you. But it'll be available to you when you get back.
Good.
You just look at our YouTube site. You look at our OC16. Look at our Spreaker.com. You can find all the links through ThinkTechHawaii.com. But before I get on to that, I just want to know where in Iceland you're going.
Well, we're starting in Reykjavik, but then we're going out to a national park out in the eastern section or western section of the country. There's a big national park with hiking trails and glaciers and waterfalls and all the rest of this stuff. My wife Luann and I go somewhere every year hiking where we've never been before, and Iceland fits that category.
That's
so
great
off
on
we
every
go.
level. Every
off
level.
We go. Yeah.
I hope it's not too cold for you. But
it's going to be in the 50s. So.
Global warming, nothing's too cold.
That's
anymore.
right. Yeah.
This is a fringe benefit.
Right.
Well, I hope when you come back, you'll tell us more about it.
Sure.
Really, I'm serious. I'd love to, debrief with you when you come back.
For a while, I thought I was going to be going there to capture Edward Snowden, since they thought he was going to go to Iceland. But now it looks like he's going to South America, so I can take that off my things to do while in Iceland.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. Go there at the same time as a debacle with him.
Yeah.
A moment on him. We spoke of him just briefly before the show began, and I told you my view of it is very simplistic. He's a traitor. What do you think?
Well, he could be a well-meaning fool or a traitor. It's somewhere in that, or maybe both. They're not mutually exclusive, but he's certainly no hero, certainly no whistleblower. Whistleblowers undo, things that their government or their company is doing that are wrong. In this case, he revealed national secrets to put Americans at risk as opposed to making us more protected. So, at the best, he's a fool, but a shameless self-promoter fits in there somewhere. And the deeper he goes and the more he reveals, the more traitor seems to apply. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, this is one, good reason never to drop out of high school.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I think it goes to education. I think, he and maybe many others, don't fully understand the nature of the country. And although, it's a mixed bag as to whether we should ever have a draft again, this makes you think maybe we should, so that generation will understand that you got to pay a little price to keep the country together and make it a country, keep it safe. All that.
Who knows, if we had a draft, maybe he'd be living in Canada now and he'd be releasing their secrets instead of ours. So, never know.
Would be.
Never know, yeah.
Anyway, I did want to talk to you about what you might say were you here when we did our program on drones. First to say that, there have been companies in Hawaii making drones. There have been companies who in Hawaii would like to buy drones, including commercial companies.
Right.
And it's a technology which has demonstrated, extraordinary potence, that you can target somebody out of a bunker in Colorado and kill them by pushing buttons like an arcade game. Nintendo, but with fatal effect. And this has had a huge effect, at least in some aspects of our international thinking in our world. So I guess the first question is to get into how the notion of a machine that kills long distance, continents away, with amazing accuracy, deadly amazing accuracy, plays in foreign policy in general. And it goes to the question of the process of deterrence, the threat practice. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, first, Jay, I think we need to put it in a broader perspective. Not all drones carry missiles and rockets to blow up things.
Some of them look at real estate.
Some of them look at real estate. Some of them look at the continental shelf. Some of them look at fishing grounds. Some of them look at deterioration of the coral reefs and all of this. So there's a lot of different reasons why we have drones, and they're very useful. And they can stay up for a long time. You don't have to worry about a pilot sitting there flying it, which fatigue factor, but certainly in some instances it's a risk factor as well. Remember Gary Powers and his visit to the Soviet Union? Well, if there'd have been a drone, there wouldn't have been a crisis.
It's true. It's nice to know that'll never happen again.
Yeah, that's right. So it's certainly there's a number of benefits to having an unmanned vehicle. Keep in mind also that this isn't some little killer rabbit that you send out there and it starts shooting at whatever it sees. This is controlled by a human being in a van or in a box or somewhere who's flying it, essentially, who is looking at it, who is making the human decision whether or not to press a button with certain rules of engagement. There have been talk about having these sort of automated things where if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you shoot it.
You know it's coming. It's like the self-driving car. You know it's coming. It's out there.
Maybe. But I think there are moral and ethical considerations there. I think there are a lot of considerations there where people are going to have to think twice, and I think will think twice. I mean, we're not a bunch of Strangelovian folks, despite the caricatures that some people put, and particularly the military.
That raises a very interesting question, Ralph, because drone technology, it's ubiquitous. You can find it. The Iranians can find it. They can buy it. They can make it. They can look it up on the internet. They can do the same things really within fair tolerance of what we're doing, and they're not necessarily constrained by the same moral concerns. So we may find ourselves in a free-for-all where, they go for us without any ethical boundaries.
It's a risk. That's why you have to be able to defend. That's why you have radars. That's why you have national defense means in order to sort of protect yourself from drones. Just as they're going to develop capabilities to intercept and shoot down these drones, or to interfere with them in a way that makes them land. We had one instance, I think, in Iran where nobody's quite sure how the drone ended up landing there, but it could have been commandeered remotely, or it could have just been an accident or whatever. So there's going to be offense, there's going to be defense. You always have that, and people are going to find ways to try to game the system and not use it. And once you open up that Pandora's box, you got to be prepared for it to be used against you as well. We have a great technological edge over most of the rest of the world, but not over all of the rest of the world. So we have to be careful with that kind of stuff. We also have to be careful with the kind of precedents that we set that may then be able to come back and be used against us. Now, right now, I would say there's still it's a restricted use. There's certain rules of engagement. Great care is taken, but even then, you see children getting killed. You see civilians getting killed. You see. I mean, one of the ways people defend against this is by, going to work in a school bus, or I mean, we've seen that for years.
Headquarters under the hospital.
You put your missile site in a schoolyard, and then if you attack it, you're attacking a school, and these type of things. So people know how to play that game. You have to be very, very careful with it.
those are things we already, we've had contact with those kinds of perversities already in other contexts.
Right.
So can we talk though from a point of view of foreign policy and soft power, hard power, and deterrence and threat?
Yeah.
How does that work when you try to achieve, an acceptable balance of power? When do you use threat type play? Threat.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, one of our advantages, quote unquote, is our so-called soft power, a term that was coined by actually one of the chairmen of my board at Pacific Forum, Joe Nye, and it's sort of the strength of your ideas and your ideals, and people want to be like you because of you're on the moral high road, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can argue that using drones sort of takes you off the moral high road in some areas, and it can be a hit on your soft power. Anytime you use hard power, it may detract from your soft power. But if somebody's out there who wants to kill you, trying to convince them to be more like you is probably not going to work. These are folks that are beyond convincing. So you have to have a combination of both. There was a study at CSIS that talked about smart power, and that's using your hard power smartly in a way that doesn't undermine your soft power, and sort of
That's great stuff.
put the combination of both. Yeah, this is it's great. This is why it's fun to be in think tanks. You come up with all these neat terms, and then you get to define them.
And maybe they actually have an effect long term on the history of the world.
Yeah, and we heard Secretary Clinton making reference to those terms. I think we've heard Secretary Kerry now doing the same thing. So it's important, and our national leaders understand that we have an image to maintain and to protect. Sometimes our Congress doesn't seem to understand that. In my view, they're a national embarrassment in many respects by the way they make us look to the rest of the world like we're a bunch of dysfunctional fools who can't get anything right.
And you have to pay a price when you do that.
And that pays a price. I mean, one of the attractions, one of the arguments that you want to make to people in other countries is, you should aspire to be more like America. And you can't say that with a straight face overseas nowadays. Go, sure, yeah, you want us to have a government that doesn't know how to function. You can't pass a budget for years, and you're sitting there laying off government workers now because you can't agree on a budget. This is what we should aspire to be. So
and it has all these secondary effects. I mean, a couple of days ago, these various leaders in Europe are making fun of us, because we want them to maintain, we want them to return Snowden and to maintain the same, idea about preservation of government secrets. And they say, ho ho. They can't take us seriously, and it's because I think we're on a slope here, and we're trundling down the slope.
I mean, they're also, in some cases, they're disingenuous. I mean, the whole Snowden thing. I read this thing in the paper the other day. It said, how can we tell the Chinese they shouldn't use cyber attacks against our companies after we've had the Snowden incident? And the answer is simple. The NSA programs were aimed at mining data to try to discover patterns to be able to home in on terrorist activity. If you can't see the difference between that and stealing, government stealing corporate secrets to provide to state-owned enterprises, then you're not a very effective diplomat. I mean, it's completely different, and the press should be ashamed of itself in many respects for drawing these parallels where they're not, and sort of playing into that game instead of pointing out that this is just, it's a ridiculous comparison.
And they work against the country, big time, because it's how we are perceived in the world that gives us smart power, hard power, or the other kind. We're going to take a short break.
All right.
I'm sorry.
And then maybe we can talk about drones.
Maybe.
Yeah. I thought you were talking about scones, and so you just threw me off completely.
We can do that too.
All right. Good.
That's Ralph Cossa, Pacific Forum. We will talk about foreign policy implications of drone development in Hawaii. We'll be right back after this break.
Good.
We're back, we're live, we're ThinkTech, you know, and one of the things about ThinkTech is you guys, you audience people, you don't get a chance to hear what Ralph and I talk about during the breaks. It's really exciting.
Well, I just don't give away my secret scone recipe. You know, that's
some things are classified.
That's right.
So anyway, that's Ralph Cossa. He's president of Pacific Forum CSIS. We're talking about foreign policy implications of drone development. And one thing I'll have to admit that came up in the break is this issue about you know, the dichotomy, okay, of taking a moral position and saying, you know, you should be nice, telling all the other countries in the world you should be nice, and then we go out and we assassinate people using drones. How do you reconcile that? What do you say to them when they point out the inconsistency?
You know, if the other guy isn't playing by Marquis of Queensberry rules, and you are, you put yourself at a disadvantage. So you've got to figure out where the pros, where the cons are. There are a number of different ways that you could be going out after these folks. One way is with a drone in the sky with a missile on it. The other way is, you know, a special forces guy on a horse with a knife in his teeth, you know, who's going to go out there. Yeah, and we're going to lose a lot of horses and a lot of special forces guys
Such a nuisance.
doing it that way, which you know, can be expensive. So at the end of the day, it's a trade-off, Jay, and it's you know, there are moral questions that have to be asked, and I think it's right to ask them. And certainly there has to be some rules of engagement, some codes. You don't use these things indiscriminately. I think there's some pretty serious restrictions on when you can fire, when you can't fire. I don't have access to all of that stuff, so I have no idea at the end of the day. But I know that these are not a bunch of crazed people who are out there trying to, you know, count how many body bags they can fill.
No.
What they're trying to do is minimize damage, minimize collateral damage, but get to the people who are plotting to actively do stuff against us. And when these guys are located in all these different remote areas, there really aren't a lot of different options. And keep in mind that, you know, these are the same guys that are taking explosive devices and throwing them indiscriminately on roads and blowing up anyone that happens to drive over it. So, you know, there's both high-tech and low-tech ways of killing people. They're both discriminate and indiscriminate ways of killing people. And you've got to, at the end of the day, you know, address the moral question, but also address the requirement to keep people safe and to interdict these people who are sworn to come out and do us harm.
Actually, the drone, in a way, is more humane than putting an IED out in the road and killing anyone who comes near. At least you're making an effort, a reasonable, rational effort to, you know, focus on the one person who you know has been doing bad things. But you know, it all assumes a few things. It assumes that the people in charge of the drones, the fellow in the bunker with the controls, his boss, his boss's boss, can make a good list of targets. I mean, it's like bombing, I suppose, except that in this case it's just, you know, often just one person. But how do you do that, and should you relegate that to the sort of the chain of command? What kind of staff function should you have? What do they call it? A special court, as we do with you know, black box data gathering. Who do you trust to make the right choice there? Because sometimes you have foreign policy implications.
No, I mean, you always have foreign policy implications on this. You're operating over somebody else's territory. You know, the Pakistanis always protest. They know we're doing it. In some cases, they're helping us doing it, but they still have them. You know, for their own domestic political reasons, they have to, you know, what, gambling in my casino? You know, so you know, this is part of the game they play. So there's always foreign policy implications to it. There's always concerns about retribution. You know, it's, you know, we used to joke. I used to work on the Middle East at one time, and we joked that a pragmatist was someone who only held a grudge for 3 generations. You know, I mean, you know, so you kill him, then he's got to kill somebody, and then, you know, so you go back and forth, and before you know it, there's, you know, holy wars going on for a couple hundred years, and each one is, no one is starting it. Everyone's trying to get even, and you can do this forever. So it's, you know, again, there's moral concerns there, but at the end of the day, there's got to be oversight. I think there is oversight in it. You've got to trust the leaders that you have either elected or appointed to these positions. You don't get to be senior military people by being stupid. The stereotypes are long gone. These are pretty well-educated people and normally with pretty high sense of responsibility. And then you have to have faith in them. Now, will somebody go nuts? A Lieutenant Calley, remember him?
Possible.
I mean, you have those things. A Snowden, you have 1 million plus people with security clearances. One guy decides he's going to unleash everything.
Yeah.
And he makes the other 999,900 whatever look bad. But you've got to have faith in the system. And then you've got to have procedures in place where you respond if somebody abuses it, and you got to make it very clear, what the consequences
There's no
are
damage
if you
control.
do.
I'll
if
give you a
do abuse it.
hypothetical. Give you a hypothetical. So, suppose somebody loses it. Somebody in the bunker loses
Yeah.
it, and they target the wrong person.
Yeah.
I mean, they target
Their
somebody.
mother-in-law or someone.
Right.
Like that.
Somebody who's
Yeah.
really not an appropriate target,
Right.
and kills him.
Yeah.
And this gets on the press, and then just like in the Snowden affair, the world press takes up the meat axe against us, the U.S. Says you can't do that anymore. You can't do drones. You can't have these targeted killings that are determined by in bunkers. And then we pay the price because then our initiative is
No,
jeopardized.
that's right. But the one thing that I would like to believe, because I've seen it in action, is that if that one person decides, for whatever reason, goes nuts, decides revenge, et cetera, and uses that for a purpose that it wasn't made for, he's going to be held accountable. He's going to be court-martialed. He's going to be put in jail. He may be put to death, depending on the seriousness of the crime. So, and when you are a pilot, when you are a drone operator, when you are an artilleryman, you're schooled in the consequences of all of this, and you have a certain responsibility, and you will be held accountable. And there's enough examples in our history where we have held people accountable. It's the same thing with policemen. Are we because one policeman goes nuts and beats somebody over the head with a club, are we going to say, okay, policemen can no longer carry guns and clubs? There are some people that would say that would be the solution.
Yeah,
that would just
right.
result in a hell of a lot more crime and more dead policemen, and
Right,
that's not
right.
the solution.
To be practical, you need to be
what you
right on
have
the
to
ball.
do is, if you get the bad apple, you make an example of them, and you prosecute them, and you
Discourage that kind of
send the
conduct.
message that this is there are limits and that won't be tolerated, and that's what responsible leaders do.
It strikes me that there's somebody out there who would say to you, Ralph, what about standards? We need a court. We need special people appointed. We need to know the burden of proof.
Yeah.
We need to know the kind of evidence that should be considered in making a life-death decision on a targeted individual. And the answer to that, of course, is wait a minute. This is our private business. We have military and strategic considerations here. We aren't going to reveal that to the public because then everybody will know how we make these decisions. We can't afford to do that.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's not reviewed, Jay. I mean, that's why you have an attorney general. That's why you have the whole judicial system. Before any president orders this kind of stuff, there's a legal review. There's a judicial review. There are standards that are set because they need to be able to hold themselves up in the case there is
that
an
happens.
inquiry that it's obviously on a tactical basis. Okay, we just found out that Osama bin Laden is in this Jeep. Well, let's hold a court. Let's call a judge and let's have a trial and see whether we, I mean, that obviously
work.
it
We'd be
would not
losing,
work.
yeah.
So there are some things that you've got to set the standards and then hope the standards work and then have the flexibility to respond when you have to.
Honestly, didn't it surprise you? I mean, I know it surprised me somewhere along the way when I saw the president stand up and say, we've killed him. We assassinated him. We murdered him. And forget about process, forget about judges and juries and all that stuff that civilization has built in the last 5,000 years. We took him out. I don't know. Did that surprise you at all? It surprised me.
I mean, my initial reaction was, "Thank God and hallelujah."
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
This is a long time coming. my next reaction was, geez, too bad they couldn't have captured him.
Right.
And then the next reaction was, thank God they didn't capture him, or Johnny Corcoran would have been there with, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, and and he would have probably got 2 years and walked, because so at the end of the day, I didn't lose a lot of sleep with the fact that somebody put a bullet in his head. I mean, it would have been it would have been a circus, quite
Sure,
frankly,
sure.
in this case.
If that's commentary in our
yeah.
legal system,
But-
maybe you're going too
Yeah,
far.
no, it is. But also, I mean, this wasn't, CSI knocked on the door and broke into somebody's house. This was a stealth operation, flying helicopters into a foreign country in the dead of light, landing in the dark, going into a building with a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of guns. What's amazing is that Americans were not killed
It was
in
amazing,
this,
amazing.
and that they managed to pull this off and
they had
walk
the
out with
nerve
the
to
body.
do it. What
And
heroes they
That's
were.
right, and do it and get all of that data and everything else that they took with
Yeah.
them, which is I'm sure they're still going through. I mean, Osama's porn tapes aside, there was also some good stuff, or
He's
maybe
human.
that was the good stuff. I'm not sure, but at any rate, they're going through all of the stuff. My hat's off to them. So
Me too.
yeah.
But doesn't these events over the last, it hasn't been that long, say a couple, 3 years with the drones and with, was it the Dark Knight 30 or 30, whatever, the movie they made
Yeah.
so recently.
Yeah, Zero Dark 30.
Zero
Yeah.
Dark 30. Doesn't it sort of show us that war has been changed by these technologies, by this kind of strategic assassination technique? It's different now, and it's not the million men, on the Maginot Line
Yeah.
anymore. It's just a couple of people.
Yes and no. The point is that it could still be the other way, and you always have to be prepared for the other way, and be prepared to deter and prevent the other way. But the range of options is quite large now, and certainly you would much rather have the ability to go in and take somebody out with a special forces unit on a helicopter than Desert Storm 3, where you're marching 100,000 people toward Iraq, and a lot of people are getting killed on both sides. So yeah, but you've got to be able to do both, and the one hasn't made the other impossible or unthinkable. It just gives you some other options,
And hopefully
you can
lesser
Yeah.
violent options will prevail.
Yeah.
The other thing, to continue on the thought of drones and the active threat, the threat practice, if you will. I just wonder, drones are by definition, they're discreet. And you don't go out and ever tell anybody exactly what you have in mind. It just happens quietly, and then maybe or maybe not, it's revealed to the world by one party or another exactly what happened. But do you foresee a time when it will be an element in the threat practice where one country, one force, maybe not the United States, maybe somebody else, maybe Iran, who knows what, North Korea, they say, we have drones now, and unless you do what we want you to do, we're going to send a drone for you, so don't take a walk at night. Do you think it hasn't happened yet, right?
No, but you've seen the North Koreans already showing their little videos of blowing up the White House and doing all these other things. So they're already trying to play these mind games. My advice is be very careful what you threaten to do. If the U.S. believed that North Korea was capable of putting a nuclear weapon on a long-range missile and hitting a target half the world away, then the next time they put one of those missiles on a launcher, we have a moral obligation to take that out,
Yes.
to destroy it,
Whatever it
on the
takes.
launcher before it's launched. So I wouldn't brag about that capability until I had it, and if I had it, I wouldn't brag about it. So this is, you've got to be very, very careful. When the North Koreans claimed that they had great weapons and were going to, strike us, and then you had a bomb explode at the Boston Marathon. If there had been radioactivity associated with that bomb, the North Koreans would have had to prove they weren't
Yeah.
involved.
Right.
Because how many countries have the capability to do a dirty bomb? Well, we know you have plutonium. How do we know it's not your plutonium? Be very careful about making these kind of threats,
Yeah.
because somebody might actually believe you, and then they're gonna respond.
And right or wrong, they'd be
Yeah.
entitled to respond.
That's right.
Because you put
Yeah.
yourself in the ring that
Yeah.
way. Well, that's Ralph Cossa. He's with Pacific Forum. We're getting deeply into this thing about drones and, may I say, threat practice. And we're talking about foreign policy implications of drone development and maybe other things related to that. We'll be right back after this break.
It's a short walk.
Okay, well, that's why we wanted to get an office close.
Yeah.
Maybe move closer. We're back. We're live. We're ThinkTech. We're doing Asia in Review with the president of Pacific Forum, Ralph Cossa. Okay, we're talking about foreign policy implications of drone development and other similar kinds of technologies. And I wanted to hear in the third quarter of our program, Ralph, I wanted to get into, how do you think this is going to evolve? Right now, it's pretty effective. It's going to become more effective. Conceivably, it becomes automated, like the Google car, where it just drives itself, and it's automated to make moral decisions. This doesn't sound very good.
No.
And it keeps the peace. So it's programmed to keep the peace. How do you see this evolving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've watched the same science fiction movies that you do, where the machines take control and go off on their own. And I'm not a big believer in that. I am a believer in human accountability. So I would be very hesitant to, even if it's technically capable, to develop a drone that sort of can act on its own and think on its own. I would be very hesitant to use that. I think you've got to have the human factor in there. There's always a chance the human is going to screw up, but you can hold a human accountable. It's very hard to hold a machine accountable, or a programmer accountable, or somebody can screw around with it.
Let's say I decide that Joe Dokes, and you name the city, needs to be taken out. He's trying to do bad things on this country. We need to take him out. And I make a machine that will take him out. And once I put his name on the line, it knows enough to perform all the steps necessary. Is that what you're talking about, or is it the decision about Joe Dokes?
No, I mean it's the decision about Joe Dokes. But if you know Joe, you know that's where you got the poison umbrella, where you just go and stab him and take care of him
I know,
that
I saw
way,
that movie too.
you know, give him the pill. I don't think we're going to get to the point where we're going to. I would hope. I mean, it'd be crazy to be using a drone to go after an individual, walking down a city street somewhere.
So it's a collateral damage issue.
There's a collateral damage issue, which is a serious issue. I mean, you don't use $1 million drone when a 29-cent bullet can do the same thing. But if that guy is in Waziristan, in a village that's impossible to get to, then that drone makes sense. Then your guided missile makes sense. Then your high-tech equipment makes sense. But you don't. I mean, it's sort of science fiction to start talking about, well, let's take out, the next door neighbor because his dog is barking, or take out the dog. There's other ways you can take out the neighbor's dog
You
without.
still have to have a system of criminal justice.
Yeah. And again, you got to have checks and balances. You got to have accountability. And at the end of the day, there's a chain of command, and someone up that chain of command has got to be held responsible.
I went to a function of the College of Engineering a couple of years ago, and they had the students made it. It was a little helicopter drone thing, and it was really a nice job. It flew a little funny, but then it was just students. And a month later, I was in an airport on the mainland, and I went to Sharper Image in the airport, and son of a gun, they had a thing that cost $300 American that did the same thing, complete with a camera affair on it. It was made out of a very light material. It had 3 little electric engines, and it didn't fly funny. It flew straight. I said to myself, anybody could walk into the airport, whatever city that was, and buy this for $300 and do things with this very device. I mean, this is going to propagate, don't you think? And I mean,
I mean, there's. I don't lose a lot of sleep over remote cars and stuff like that. Although theoretically, you can put a bomb in a U-Haul, or you can put a bomb in a little toy car, and the difference is the U-Haul, you can put a hell of a bigger bomb in it than you can put in a little toy car or toy helicopter. So you're not going to do a great deal of damage, but it's more things that you have to look at, guard against, beware of. But we can't be paranoid.
No.
I mean, we can't, start looking for the.
At the same time, we always have to
under
look
every
ahead,
tree.
and we have to see, technology always overlaps itself. If something comes from behind you never expected, and then that's the flavor of the day. And I suggest to you that this all may be an irrelevant discussion in the war of the future, which may be a cyber war, which has huge effect with no immediate loss of life, but which brings down a civilization, a society in no time. And so drones won't matter much then.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps, Jay, but I would have trouble. I think cyber is very serious, and we need to work on cyber. And people need to realize. I mean, we've been having Pacific Forum has dialogue with Chinese military, U.S. military and Chinese military, and we try to bring them together to try to understand certain things. In the Cold War, the Soviets knew that if they attacked our satellites, made them blind, we would assume that ICBMs were on their way, and we would have to launch. So that could start.
Talk about the threat practice.
That could start a war. People that have this side of cyber capability have to understand that you could set things in motion that would require an asymmetrical response that could be very unhappy and very unpleasant. So you've got to talk with one another, and we're helping the Chinese and the Americans talk together. I think that's important. We've had those kind of conversations for years with the Russians, with the kind of countries that have the kind of capabilities that you have to be aware of. The problem is the outliers, the Irans and the North Koreans, who may start fiddling with this stuff and don't quite understand the consequences, or decide that they bluffed a little bit and we didn't respond, and therefore they should bluff a little bit more. And this was brinksmanship only works if you know where the brink is. and don't go over it.
It's a great game. I mean, I
yeah,
admire you being in it and understanding it.
And it's, the North Koreans have been great at playing brinksmanship because they always stop about 2 steps from the edge and back off. They sort of create a crisis and then say, okay, now if you'll pay us to stop creating crises, we'll do that.
The mouse that roared.
Yeah, Saddam, he went about 2 steps beyond. You know, it was sort of like the Roadrunner. Whoops, you know, and down he went. And you know, so that's the problem with those kind of games is they're not games. So you have to be very careful in how you play
Well, you're
them.
right, and I keep thinking
Yeah.
of I don't know if you remember this book, but it was called Guns of August.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's the story of the configuration in Europe, the stacking up of strategies and weapons that was going on for decades
Yeah.
before 1914.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're coming up on the celebration. The celebration is the wrong word, but we're coming up on August 14th, which
Yeah.
is when those first guns were fired
Yeah.
in Sarajevo, right?
Yeah.
And you wonder whether all these weapons, all the weapons we've been talking about, sort of line up, and they're pointed this way and that way, and they have this significance and that significance, and maybe if something goes off, it starts a chain reaction, like a domino kind of thing. This is possible, isn't it?
I mean, over the years, we've learned lessons. I think all countries have. There are checks and balances. You don't get to be a leader of a country by being crazy. And if you say that so-and-so is irrational, what you're really saying is you're not capable of understanding their rationale. No one does something that they think is irrational. They
have their reasons.
So you got to ask yourself now, why does he think that that's rational? Why does he think this game that he's playing is rational? And if you do that, if you can try to understand it, you'll find out most people are not crazy. You don't get to run a country. You don't get to run a big organization by being crazy. You may not be warm and cuddly, but you're not crazy, and you've just got to sort of understand that and sort of establish the parameters, and that's what we try to do in all these dialogues.
You love your work, don't you?
I do, yeah.
God,
It's fun.
Looking
It's fun.
beyond
Yeah.
the world as we know it.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, we have to look beyond this break
All right.
as we know it.
Good.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be
Okay.
right back. And after that, I would like to discuss with you how this all, or some of it, plays out in the 3 countries in South America that offered Snowden. Coming back to the
Okay,
beginning,
good.
what does it mean for us
Yeah.
and them that they did that?
Yeah.
We'll be right back after this break. We're here with Ralph Cossa, Foreign Policy Implications of Drone Development and Other Relevant and Irrelevant Things.
Right.
We'll be right back. We're back. We're live. We're here with Ralph Cossa, the president of Pacific Forum CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Right.
I had that tattooed on the inside of mine. Okay, and we're talking about foreign policy implications of drone development and other such things. And the one question left hanging, before the break was how does what we've been talking about, namely drones and other high-tech weapons and threats and traitor type things, relate to the three countries in South America that offered him, I guess all three offered him asylum, Snowden. What does that mean? You wonder, can the U.S. stop those countries from doing that? Should the U.S. punish them? How do we handle this kind of thing now and in the future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel pretty confident that we will not send a killer drone over Venezuela to take the guy out while walking down the boulevard somewhere. And, wouldn't be bad if he thought we might do that and keep him indoors and keep him quiet. But I don't see us doing that. I think obviously this is someone who has created great harm to our national security. I mean, we're talking about drones, and there's a million little villages in Pakistan and a million homes in those villages. How does the drone know which one to look at? Well, which one was sending the telephone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning to Saudi Arabia or to Sudan or somewhere like that? That's what this whole NSA program was about. It was tracking the data and finding out where these strange patterns were coming from, and then that lets you home in on a particular neighborhood or on a particular phone, and then you try to go in there and find out what's going on, rather than trying to watch a million homes in a million cities. So
it's good technology.
So yeah, you've got to. You can't just have that drone in the sky. You need the intelligence to, and that was part of the intelligence that's been affected. So the guy did serious harm, and we should take that seriously, and we should make every effort to bring him to justice, just to make sure that other people understand the consequences of deciding that you are going to be the judge and jury on whether or not some program meets your particular code. I mean, there are ways that he could have handled this that would have been certainly much more responsible. The fact that he first fled to Hong Kong and then revealed it pretty well tells you he understood that what he was doing was wrong.
Do you think he was compromised before he fled, or before he committed?
Yeah.
Well, before he revealed.
Yeah. No idea.
That some foreign power might have talked to him or encouraged him to do that.
No, I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, and it seems to me that the Chinese were not pleased that he was in Hong Kong and were eager to see him go.
Embarrassing.
There was an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday that talked about the Russians and the Chinese, and it's by some serious scholars. And one of the sentences said the Chinese allowed him to go to Hong Kong. Come on, I can go to Hong Kong. You can go to. The Chinese don't decide who goes to Hong Kong. And the Chinese didn't have a clue who Snowden was when he arrived in Hong Kong. He was just another American tourist. So that it's just. Let's get real on all of this stuff. I mean, I was sort of disappointed in both the authors and the New York Times for publishing this kind of stuff. Somebody needs to think, and sort of put a reality test. But clearly, any country that offers him asylum is doing it because they want to tweak us.
Yes.
It's not because they believe that this guy is the paragon of virtue. And in fact, most of the countries who would offer him asylum, paragons of virtues, are not synonymous with that country. It's just sort of the opposite. So
notice that Russia backed off.
Yeah, I mean, even
Russia,
because of they didn't want to upset their partners, the United States. What Putin said is, "I'm not stupid. I'll find ways to tweak you guys, but I'm not. I'm not getting in the middle of this one. I'll steal everything I can from them and copy it, but then I'm not gonna keep them. So anyone that does it is trying to jab us. So they should expect they're going to get jabbed back. Economic sanctions. There are legal sanctions. You prevent them from visiting places. There are a number of different ways, and And what it really does is excite the Congress to create new laws that essentially interfere with U.S. foreign policy practices.
right,
and,
right.
and that's never
Grandstanding, as
that's
it were.
right. That's never a good thing. But this is, I mean, our founding fathers were smarter than our current members of Congress, so they, try to find ways. It's just like this is somewhat off the subject now, but the Congress passed a law prohibiting the U.S. to provide aid to any government that is to any military that removes a democratically elected government.
Yes.
Right? So this was, high moral standards and all that. So now you've got the Morsi government, which
Sure.
was about as undemocratic as a democratically elected government could be, being removed. And now they're trying to figure out how do we get around our own law, which prevents us from thanking the Egyptian military. If
Levin, Senator Levin was on the radio today on that issue.
If the Iranian military had been left alone rather than being moralized by Jimmy Carter many years ago, we wouldn't have the mess in Iran that we have today, where we insisted the Iranian generals stay in the barracks and let democracy take its course in Iran, and thank you very much, said the mullahs, and took over, and now we have the mess in Iran. So we've got to be very careful. And what I would predict in the Snowden thing is that we're going to see a whole new flurry of laws that are going to be aimed at teaching them a lesson or grandstanding, and the end result is going to be to make the conduct of foreign policy, which belongs to the president, not to the House of Representatives, much more difficult in the future because of this. And that's my prediction for how we're going to respond to all of this.
It's great to have you here. It's great to have your predictions. It makes us all want to be part of a think tank and think along with you, Ralph, especially in these times when the world gets smaller and smaller and things happen and they have counteractions everywhere immediately. It's amazing. It's great to be alive in these times.
Well,
Tell us-
www.pacforum.org.
Give us 1 minute on Pac Forum.
Yeah.
What is it? What does it do?
We're a foreign policy think tank. We do a lot of work for the government. We do a lot of work for others as well. We try to bring people together, create dialogues. We get the Japanese and the Koreans talking, the Japanese and the Chinese and the Americans. We bring North Koreans to meetings to talk with South Koreans and Americans on foreign policy issues. Joe Vasey, our founder, 96 years young now, believed that Asia was important. Americans needed to understand that. Asians needed to understand that America was a player in Asia, and we've been sort of following that mission ever since by promoting dialogue. We have Young Leaders Program where we sort of focus on the 22 to 35 age group, and donations are all tax deductible, fully
Thank you
tax
for that,
deductible.
yes.
Yeah. And www.pacforum.org. We produce once or twice, 3 times a week, 1 to 2 page commentaries on what's happening in different security areas, all free, available on the internet, available by subscription for nothing if you just contact us. And we're a group with an overactive Mother Teresa gene. We're trying to save the world.
It's okay.
And
it's
do
much more
good
than
things.
It's much more than just thinking and talking.
Yeah.
It's actually you're doing diplomacy.
Right.
Thank you, Ralph Cossa.
Sure.
Great
Thanks,
to have
Jim.
you here.
Thank
Aloha.
you. Thanks.